So good afternoon to everybody from the Regional Council of Megiddo, to all of our friends in the world and in Israel. My name is Ruth Wasserman Lande. I was born in Israel but raised in South Africa, in Cape Town. In fact, I was in high school, in Herzliya High School, where Sali Kaplinski was my school principal. And I'm still very good friends with Ronit Kaplinski, who lives in Israel. We both made Aliyah at the same time. At the moment, I have the huge privilege of being a member of the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, and it is more of an honor to me to be able to represent something which is very important to the Jewish heritage and our history. In fact, I'm here to speak about Isaac Ookberg, who had saved 187 Jewish orphans from Ukraine at times of pogroms, anti-Semitism, and disease. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin with calling the Eliakim Children's Ensemble to sing a small song called Tfilah, Prayer.
יושב לו שם במרומים, הוא הרופא כל חולים, הוא הנותן רוב שמחה לילדים, הוא העושה משפטים,
הוא בשמיים והוא היחיד, הוא הגדול הנורא, הוא השומר עלינו מצרה. אלוהים שמור עלינו כמו ילדים, שמור נא מעט לעזור, תן לנו אור ושמחת נעורים, תן לנו כוח עוד ועוד, שמור נא עלינו כמו ילדים, שמור נא מעט לעזור, תן לנו אור ושמחת נעורים, תן לנו גם לאור. מה כבר נותר לנו עוד בימים? מה כבר נותר כל היום? שמש תקווה והמון מבטים, לילה ויום של חלום. הוא בשמיים והוא היחיד, הוא הגדול הנורא, הוא השומר עלינו מצרה. אלוהים שמור נא עלינו כמו ילדים, שמור נא מעט לעזור, תן לנו אור ושמחת נעורים, תן לנו כוח עוד ועוד, שמור נא עלינו כמו ילדים, שמור נא מעט לעזור, תן לנו אור ושמחת נעורים, תן לנו גם לאור, תן לנו גם לאור, תן לנו גם לאור.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now have the honor to read a greeting from His Excellency the President of the State of Israel, Mr. Reuven Rubi Rivlin.
Dear friends, as you gather together at this virtual event to mark the 100th anniversary of the courageous and inspiring efforts that culminated in the rescue of almost 200 Jewish orphans from the chaos and pogroms of the Ukraine in 1921, I want to join with you in paying tribute to the late Mr. Isaac Ookberg. Isaac Ookberg, at great personal risk, travelled from South Africa to Ukraine during the chaotic and murderous aftermath of World War I and the Russian Revolution, where he succeeded in bringing some of the many Jewish orphan children to South Africa, where they found safety and a new home. Over the coming years, Isaac Ookberg continued his outstanding efforts to support some of his Jewish brethren less fortunate than himself, also making very significant contributions to settlement efforts in what was to become our State of Israel. Many of the children and grandchildren of those orphans who found refuge among the Jewish communities of South Africa remember their parents and grandparents speaking of the wonderful man they called Papa Ookberg. The Ookberg lookout at Ramat Menashe is indeed a fitting tribute to that great man and has become a focus of pilgrimage by the descendants of those orphans rescued by Isaac Ookberg, where they can view the plaques bearing the names of each of the orphans and plant trees in his memory. Sincerely, Reuven Ruvi Rivlin.
It is now my utmost pleasure to call upon the Mayor of the Regional Council of Megiddo, Mr. Itzik Cholavsky, please.
חברים יקרים בארץ ובעולם, שלום רב. כמי שגדל כל חייו במועצה האזורית מגידו, כבן לאב שהיה מפקד פרטיזנים ביערות בלרוס וחוקר תנועת הפרטיזנים היהודים במהלך מלחמת העולם השנייה, וכמי שסוגר מעגל ומכהן כיום כראש המועצה האזורית, אני נרגש לשאת דברי ברכה בטקס המכובד הזה. אני נרגש שכן לא כל יום יש לראש רשות במדינת ישראל את הזכות לצעוד בשביל המקשר בין ישראל והישראלים לבין יהדות התפוצות. לא כל שכן לחזק את הדרך המחברת בינינו. והשביל בו אנו צועדים כיום הוא הרצון המשותף לנו, תושבי המועצה האזורית מגידו והנהגתה, כמו גם יהודים יקרים בכל רחבי העולם, לחלוק כבוד לזכרו של יצחק אוכברג, שלפני 100 שנה הציל מאות יתומים יהודיים מאזורי הפוגרומים באוקראינה, תרם כספים רבים לפיתוחה של ארץ ישראל באמצעות הקרן הקיימת לישראל, וסייע לרכישת האדמות עליהם הוקמו שני יישובים מרכזיים במועצה האזורית מגידו, גלעד ודליה. אני מבקש בדבריי להכיר בתרומתו האדירה של האיש ולהוקיר את מעשיו, נדיבותו ונאמנותו למדינת ישראל. אינני רואה את מעשיו כדבר של מה בכך, אלא כאקט של גדלות הנפש ונתינה לדבר שהוא גדול מעצמך להמשכיותה ושרידותה של העמיות היהודית. יהי זכרו ברוך.
It is my utmost pleasure to hear the greeting now of Mr. Yitzhak Buzi Herzog, the chairman of the Jewish agency, the Sochnut.
Dear friends, I find it extremely unique that me, Isaac Herzog, as chairman of the executive of the Sochnut, the Jewish agency, the biggest Jewish organization in the world, is commemorating the memory of a person who 100 years ago established orphanages for Jews at rescue who had to be attended to under huge oppression in what was known then as Russia or the USSR, in being as a result of the Bolshevik Revolution. A huge wave of anti-Semitism raged all over that region, and Yitzhak Hochberg took upon himself to rescue these Jews and build these orphanages, and brought young Jews to Cape Town and to South Africa, which of course led to much strengthening of that unique community, which is still thriving and impressive until today. But what's unique, and that's the reason I'm speaking to you, that Yitzhak Hochberg was a member of the Zionist Congress, which convened in Switzerland in 1929. This Congress is the Congress that decided as its first item to establish the Jewish Agency for Israel, the Sochnut, as a tool, as a vehicle to bring about the independence of the Jewish people in their national homeland, basically an implementation of the famous Balfour Declaration. And indeed, we, the Jewish Agency, have completed that mission. I'm broadcasting to you from the room from where David Ben-Gurion went and led to our independence and also to declare our independence in Jerusalem. And from there on, we were commissioned to bring Aliyah, and we brought almost 4 million Olim to date. And now we are the main vehicle connecting the Jewish people to each other and to the State of Israel in a multitude of projects, being the largest and biggest Jewish organization in the world. So I believe that it was the founding stones of Yitzhak Hochberg, with his commitment to saving Jews, which drives us today in our commitment to save Jews. It was his commitment to educate young kids with Judaism and love of Zion, which drives us until today to the love of Zion. And I want to congratulate my good friends from Megiddo Council, one of the nicest regions in Israel. To my good friend Itzik Cholavsky, the head of the regional council, and to my good friend, member of the Knesset, Ruth Wasserman, who's been a driving force in arranging this event. May all of us be blessed with the great spirit of Yitzhak Hochberg, and may we continue to fulfill his dream and his legacy for the well-being of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now hear a song, Yad B'Yad, Hand in Hand, sung by the Bnot En HaShofet ensemble in the Regional Council of Megiddo.
אם המים גועשים וחייך כה קשים, אל תיפול ברוחך, בוא גלה את עצמך, רק בך עוצמה רבה. המעיין המתגבר, יד ביד אין שיר חוזר, שתי עיניך בעיניי, אין הכוח עד מדי, אין האור באפלה. יד ביד אם רק תיתן לי יד, יד ביד נצעד את כל הדרך, יד ביד אם רק תיתן לי יד, יד אם רק תיתן, יד ביד לאורך כל הדרך, יד ביד, יד ביד לאוהבים, אין תקווה לבודדים, יד ביד לחיילים, אל הבית שוב חוזרים, שוב חוזרים. יד ביד לנתקעים, עצובי מבט טועים, אל האור במרחקים, אל האור שבמרומים, לתקווה בחלומות. יד ביד אם רק תיתן לי יד, יד ביד נצעד את כל הדרך, יד ביד אם רק תיתן לי יד, יד אם רק תיתן, יד ביד לאורך כל הדרך, יד ביד, יד ביד אם רק תיתן לי יד, יד ביד נצעד את כל הדרך, יד ביד אם רק תיתן לי יד, יד אם רק תיתן, יד ביד לאורך כל הדרך, יד ביד. אם המים גועשים וחייך כה קשים, אל תיפול ברוחך, בוא גלה את עצמך, רק בך עוצמה רבה.
It is now my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to call upon Ms. Batya Shmukler, the chairman of the South African Zionist Federation in Israel, Telfed.
Hi, my name is Batya Shmukler and I am the chairman of Telfed. Thank you for including Telfed in the commemoration of a wonderful man, Isaac Ochtberg. Telfed feels connected to this special man, so connected that we've had a picture of him hanging in our boardroom since 1948. Telfed has participated in ceremonies in his honor and has sponsored trees at the official launching of the Isaac Ochtberg Park in 2011. Telfed has also helped to negotiate with the JNF South Africa to try and fund an Ochtberg Day Center and Educational Center for the elderly at the site of the Ochtberg Park. On a very personal note, I'm happy to report that we were privileged to be able to provide PRUS students to volunteer with surviving Ochtberg orphans like Sissy Harris, Zichrona Livracha, who was the last surviving Ochtberg orphan who passed away in Israel at the age of 102. Ochtberg words in 1926, "I deeply believe that the Jewish problem will find its ultimate solution only in Eretz Israel," epitomizes his vision for Palestine, or Israel, for the future. I think Telfed's dedication to its bursary project and important role in encouraging and facilitating Aliyah are very much in line with Ochtberg's vision. Telfed is proud to be part of the solution and continues helping Olim with their Klita. May we continue honoring the memory of such an inspirational man.
Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now hear the song Chai Chai Chai, originally sung by the late singer Ophra. Currently it will be sung by the Eliakim Children's Ensemble and the Megiddo Youth Ensemble. It is now my pleasure to call upon the chairman of Kakal Israel, JNF Israel, Avraham Duvdevani.
בשם קרן קיימת לישראל, אני נרגש ונפעם לשלוח ברכה זו אליכם בדרום אפריקה, בה אתם מציינים 100 שנים לפעולה הפנטסטית הזו, הנאצלת הזו, של הצלת 187 ילדים יתומים מאירופה והבאתם לדרום אפריקה. אבל יצחק אוכברג הוא מבחינתנו אישיות גדולה ונערצת בתוך הקרן הקיימת, אשר בזכות תרומותיו הגדולות לקרן הקיימת הוקמו באותם שנים הקיבוצים גלעד ודליה, שהיום אי אפשר שלא להתרגש כאשר באים לבקר ולראות מה קם מאותה תרומה פנטסטית שהוא עשה באותם שנים. ועל כך אנחנו מכירים טובה, זוכרים לטובה ומודים לכם שגם אתם מכבדים את זכרו. כל טוב ותודה רבה.
It is now my utmost pleasure to call upon a very special person with whom I had the pleasure to discuss the importance of Isaac Ochberg in the past year, Mr. David Kaplan, the chairman of the Isaac Ochberg Heritage Committee in Israel.
As we stand here today and celebrate, commemorate, honor the name of Isaac Ochberg and the centenary of his heroic rescue of 187 orphans, I stand here today wearing a cap bearing his name and a shirt bearing the name of Isaac Ochberg. Both of these are relics of the 90th anniversary we had in 2011 when we officially opened this glorious Isaac Ochberg Park. There is, however, one essential difference, a major difference which I believe best illustrates, best helps us understand, appreciate, and really identify with what happened 100 years ago. The world today is living in fear. Fear of a disease, COVID. And this can help us understand the fear of these 400,000 approximately orphans that were in Eastern Europe in the Pale of the Settlement in the early 1920s. These orphans also faced a disease. It wasn't the disease of COVID, it was typhoid. And coupled with that, they were confronted with famine, and worst of all, in this cataclysmic cauldron of hell, virulent anti-Semitism, pogroms. These were the days, it was the hunting season and the prey was the Jew. In this scenario of hell, a letter came out advising, and it was an appeal to help save these orphans. And this letter found itself to the Jewish community's leadership in Cape Town, South Africa, where the challenge became, what can we do? How can we help? Obviously one can't help and save 400,000 orphans, but let us try and save as many as we can. And one man rose up to that challenge, and he was Isaac Ochberg. He was one of the richest men in South Africa at the time, most certainly the richest Jew, but he didn't pass the challenge on to others. He took it upon himself, and risking life and limb, he went to this Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe, and by way of train, by way of horse-drawn cart, like the benevolent Pied Piper of Hamelin, he went and picked up one orphan after another from towns and Stettler all over, and eventually brought them to South Africa, where they were divided between the orphanage in Cape Town, Oranje, and the orphanage in Johannesburg, Arcadia. Thereafter, these orphans would refer to Isaac Ochberg as Daddy Ochberg, because for most of these orphans, he would become the only daddy they would ever know. Later stories would emerge, like that from Charles Migdal, whose son lives today in Israel, in Renana. Chilling recollections of the freezing conditions with little clothing and no food. Quoting Charles, when he was 5 years old and he lived there, "I lived like an animal, not a human being." Or there was young Harry Stillerman, who would be an orphan at the orphanage in Cape Town, who had one arm. Why did he have one arm? Because when he was in the shtetl, the Cossacks came in on horseback, brandishing sabers. They shot his parents in front of him. Harry lay in the mud, a 5-year-old. He raised his arm up and to protect himself, and the Cossack came with the saber and sliced off his arm and left him to die in the bots, in the mud. But he didn't die, because along came the man from South Africa, Isaac Ochberg, who picked him up with the others and brought them to South Africa. One truly indebted in Israel to Daddy Ochberg was the chairman, the very first chairman of this Isaac Ochberg Heritage Committee, Benny Penzik. Benny Penzik, from this podium in 2011, said, and this is why he's so indebted to Isaac Ochberg, because 2 of those orphans became my parents. He's the only one descendant whose both parents were orphans that Isaac saved. The most moving feature of this park is to my right over here, the Hill of Names, where embedded in rock and masonry are the names of the 187 orphans that were saved and the towns and shtetls from which they came. This park, I believe, is best summed up by a letter our committee received after we officially opened this park in 2011. It was from visitors from Cape Town, South Africa, descendants of the Ochtberg, one of the Ochtberg orphans. It was from Isaac and Henry Werb, who said the following, and they described their experience here in 2011 as our Ochtberg experience in Israel. And he wrote, quote, "Our 12-year-old great-granddaughter was with us and we made her promise to come back to the forest with her own children one day to honor those who now rest in peace in such a beautiful and tranquil place. I see this memorial as the hull of a ship and the names of the plaques as portals gazing at a wonderful vista. I know that the Ochtberg children have finally all come home." These are beautiful words. And I want to emphasize his last word, and that is the word home. Because what is lacking and what has not been told in the narrative, because home here means the state of Israel. And this is the most important aspect of Isaac Ochtberg, because Isaac Ochtberg was a visionary and he was a Zionist. He dreamt of a Jewish state like Herzl did, but like he rescued the orphans in 1921, he was not only a dreamer, he was a doer. And this brings us to why we have this park in Megiddo to Isaac Ochtberg. Because in 1936, Isaac Ochtberg left a bequest. He left a bequest to the Keren Kayemet LeIsrael, JNF, which to this day stands as the largest bequest ever made by a single individual to the state of Israel through the JNF. And it was with the proceeds of these funds, apart from being allocated to educational institutions in Israel at the time, like the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Weizmann Institute, that enabled them to buy the land, the tracts of land that we see around here, that became to Kibbutz Talia, where I point to now, and further down the road, Kibbutz Gal-Ed. These were kibbutzim that were established in 1937, Dalia, and in Gal-Ed, 1945. They were kibbutzim that were established by young people from the youth movement Hashom HaTzair, Dalia, and Gal-Ed by Habonim from Germany. If Isaac Ochtberg was saving children in the 1920s, in the 1930s and thereafter, he was saving the next generations of young adults. I want to quote from you when we celebrated the 90th anniversary at this very spot, the words of Avinoam Binder, who at the time represented Keren Kayemet LeIsrael, JNF, who said the following, and I remember him standing at this podium and he looked back at this beautiful vista and then looked at the crowd in front, and it was a crowd from people that came from all over Israel and the descendants who came from all over the world. And he said the following: Isaac Ochtberg was a dreamer who made dreams come true. When he purchased the land here, the scenery was nothing like what we see from the lookout today. Ochtberg dreamt that the Jewish people would come here to establish a Jewish state. This project is, in his honor, is to educate future generations of Israeli Jews not to take our many blessings for granted. Keren Kayemet LeIsrael, JNF, is honored to take part in this project in memory of a man who believed in the future of Israel, end quote. I want to thank the members of the Isaac Ochberg Heritage Committee, both in Israel and in South Africa, who worked tirelessly to safeguard the legacy of Isaac Ochberg, but more important as well, to spread the important message. And what is that message? That message appears here on my t-shirt. It is from the Talmud, and it is, "He who has saved one life is as though he has saved the entire world." And that is the message that when we address on Isaac Ochberg to school kids both in Israel and in South Africa, and we say tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, do a good deed. It doesn't matter how small, because you never know the impact it will have on future lives. In the same way as Isaac Ochberg, when he saved 187 kids, the amount and thousands of people that are alive today all over the world because of that one act. One of my memorable moments was in 2016, when I went to South Africa to speak at the Limud conference on Isaac Ochberg and address all the Jewish day schools in Johannesburg on Isaac Ochberg. On the last day that I was in South Africa, and before I left to leave to return to Israel, I spoke at the Torah Academy for Boys. I showed the movie and answered questions. And before parting, one young student who had just had his bar mitzvah asked, he said, "Would you like for me to blow the shofar?" And I said, "Of course." And I remember writing at the time, it said, listening to those ancient sounds that date back to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, I reflected on that shofar blower who was probably no older than the orphans that Isaac Ochberg had saved 100 years earlier. And I thought of Isaac hearing those sounds and smiling. And I'd like to believe that Daddy Ochberg is looking down today from his celestial perch at all his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-great-grandchildren who are today living in South Africa, in Australia, Canada, the USA, and of course here in Israel. And he's still smiling, and may he continue to smile for eternity and into the future. And that future will be as we further develop this wonderful, majestic, magical park, which we call the Isaac Ochberg Park, in this corner of South Africa here in Israel. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Mr. David Kaplan, the chairman of the Isaac Ochberg Heritage Committee in Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now end our ceremony. We shall all sing Hatikva. Thank you.
קולות בלבב בנימה
נפש יהודי
הומייה
ותן מזרח קדימה
עין לציון צופיה עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו התקווה בשנות
sounds the call to come together.